All right, welcome in to our session as a part of our academic initiative series, our Think Tank Thursdays. Today, our topic, the training is coming. My name is Spencer Giese. I'm a research education specialist at ACUHO-I, and we're thrilled that you're joining us for the session. We will be recording this session, so if you have colleagues that you'd like to pass this recording on to after the fact, this will be posted on our YouTube channel, and it will also be posted on our academic initiatives page on the ACUHO-I website. We have an outstanding facilitated conversation coming your way, where there will also be plenty of opportunities for you to engage as audience members. And please feel free to continue to check out our online resources that ACUHO-I provides, both on our online community, our website, and a long list of our YouTube recordings from previous roundtables that we've done. Really, your membership dollars help us to do all these initiatives. A few notes about our session today: it is recorded. We would love to have you engage in our chat by using that function to state your name, your position, your institution, really finding ways that we can still network through Zoom. We want this to be a conversation-based event, so as we get to points where there's open dialogue opportunities, please feel free to unmute and join the conversation. And then please just, again, announce and share who you are at those times. And now I'm going to pass it over to Sharisa and Kamon as our facilitators for this session. Take it away.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Spencer, and welcome to all of our audience members. I'm Kamon Simmons. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm at the University of Florida, and I serve as a coordinator for living learning initiatives in our student learning and engagement team in our Department of Housing and Residence Life. I'll kick it over to Sharisa here in just a second so she can introduce herself, and then we'll also allow our panelists, our amazing experts for today, to introduce themselves as well, and then we'll dive into some questions. And we hope you enjoy. Like Spencer invited you to do so, please use the chat and drop any additional questions in, and we're hopeful to have a good conversation today. So Sharisa.
Hi everyone, my name is Sharisa Divins. I am the Residence Life Coordinator for Educational Initiatives at the University of North Florida. I'm excited to be here and moderating this panelist discussion with you today. So Brian, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and kick us off for the panelists?
Absolutely. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Botts. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I serve as the Associate Director for Residential Learning at North Carolina State University.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lovey Marshall. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Assistant Director of Residence Life for Education and Training at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jalen Jones. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the Assistant Directors of Residence Life at the University of North Florida.
Great, thank you so much. So we'd like to start and our conversation by ensuring we have some common language for today. And so for our panelists, if you could please explain and define the differences between onboarding, training, and development, and also share how have you worked to make sure these three things are distinctly different, and what challenges have you faced so far?
Well, I can get us started. So Lovely and Jalen, please tell me to be quiet or jump in whenever. But I think for us, one of the things I do need to give a shout out to is the Association of Talent Development in regards to doing some more planful and more strategic thoughts about onboarding, training, and development. And so for me, when I think about onboarding, I think it's important for us to think about in our unit to think about how we are socializing people to an organization. Oftentimes people think onboarding begins when folks start working at an organization, but really the onboarding piece goes back, in my opinion, to the recruitment and selection process and how you're helping people understand who you are as an organization, your mission, vision, values, what it's going to be like to work there, what is it going to be like to live in the community where your organization is at. And then the onboarding piece becomes in the sense of how do you help people become acclimated to that unit organization within the first 30, 60, 90 days and making that connection there. When I think about training, I think of it more of a tactile approach in the sense of what are we doing to help people get the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and maybe potentially even create behaviors to do the work that's outlined in their position descriptions, their functions, responsibilities, the things that they're actually getting paid to do day to day. And through a successful onboarding piece, it helps lead to the training piece because people have become socialized within the organization. And then when I think about the development piece, it's really in the sense of thinking through how are we giving people and how are we helping our staff members develop individual knowledge and skills to help them grow in their career or help them to grow in their position. And what does that look like in the sense of helping them in the sense of being successful within the organization, to kind of think through what are the things that we need them to do and how we need them to progress. But more importantly, how are we thinking about what are the next steps beyond this organization? So that's how I would define the three.
Yeah, I would co-sign everything Brian just said. And I think to the piece about some of the challenges of onboarding. So I oversee all of the recruitment for my institution. I actually don't oversee training, but we often find ourselves looking like that Spider-Man meme where there's multiple Spider-Mans pointing at each other for onboarding. Like, is this you? Is this me? Who, at what point do we go from the candidates being in the recruitment pipeline to the training pipeline? And so those are constant conversations and challenges that we're working through. Something that we are looking to pilot in this next year is kind of having, instead of a separate pro staff training committee and a recruitment and training committee for pro staff, doing one sort of continuous group so that we have hands on our candidates the entire way through sort of their, from the moment they apply to when they show up and get through training to opening, there's one consistent sort of environment and vibe that our candidates are in so that they're getting the same message all the way through.
My primary focus for education and training is on our student staff. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing for sure focuses on them with like touches on our professional staff. And so when I think about like how we work through these things distinctly, I don't think we have. Like it just, we get into our process, right? And we just keep going without like thinking about how do we go from one step to one step, because you know, specifically for me, I've been in this role and I don't necessarily have to think about that for me. So I'm just kind of like rolling on through, but, you know, taking a step back now and thinking like, how does what I do affect other people? Or when can we, you know, when do they know that they're making this transition outside of an email that says, okay, now you're with your people. And so like being more distinct with that is what I'm working on now. And so, you know, I agree with everything else that was said, but like when we're thinking about like the distinction between those three, a lot of times we're just rolling through because that's what we know to do. We know our process and we forget to bring other people into that.
Well, Lovey, I appreciated what you said in the sense of taking time to really like embrace, like figure out what are we actually doing and are they, how are we putting that work together? Because I think it's important to acknowledge, and I spoke about this during the CEO annual conference and their presentation I gave too, is that oftentimes when we think about onboarding, training, and development, we just jump in and do based upon the experiences and skills that we went through, what worked well, what didn't work well, which is good. We need to use that informal assessment, the informal experiences. But I think it's important to also acknowledge that you really need to tag people who have this foundational training and talent development. And what does it actually mean to have an effective and efficient onboarding program, training program development? Because there are many things that we can learn from, in my opinion, there are many things that we can learn from our experiences, from our students and feedback, but there is a body of knowledge out there that can help us guide some of this stuff so we're not recreating the wheel over and over and over and potentially not doing good work because we're stretched so thin. And so then I think about this piece in the sense of challenges that we face. I would just name, I think, is figuring out, does everyone on our team have the skills to do this work? And if they don't, what are we doing to build up their skills to do that work? Or what are we doing to make sure we're tagging other people who can help guide us into developing these onboarding, training, and development programs so they're effective for all of us and we're not just wasting people's time?
Brian, I love that you asked the question of whether or not we're training folks on the work that they already know how to do or have zero skill and experience in, right? So in our previous Think Tank Thursday last month, we actually had a dialogue about relationship building. And for a lot of institutions, they use intentional interactions or formal one-on-one conversations for their student staff to implement learning in the residence halls, right? So one of the common challenges for Gen Z and for living in a global pandemic is how do you maintain relationships and build and maintain quality dialogues and conversations through all of those barriers. So how do you incorporate things that our students don't necessarily get taught, like having a solid conversation, into your even onboarding and training experience at your institutions?
I would say our institution a few years ago went to or moved to the focus being about belonging. I work at an art institution. As you probably know, artists, they primarily work alone, right? So they're used to being in a space or in a studio by themselves with their pieces, their feelings, their emotions, all of these things. And so they don't just operate that at school, they operate like that in life. And so when we're focusing on belonging, our goal is to hopefully help them see outside of themselves and like be able to build a community. It's not as easy as it sounds because again, they're thinking about these things for themselves. So we have worked into our community development model, intentional interactions or intentional conversations. We call them onesies. So you can have a onesie in your onesie if you want to. So we thought it was cute and they didn't, and that's fine. And so what we're starting now is helping them to understand where they fit into the overall picture of our department. And I think that's where it starts, right? Like, we're not just asking you to do onesies because we think it's cute. We're saying, here is where you fit into the department. Just kind of like, here's where you fit into the department. Because we don't talk about that with them that often. We just say, hey, you're an RA, here's what RAs do. But there really is space and place for them to understand where they fit into the department, where they fit into the overall narrative. And so right now, that's where we're going, right? We have to start there before we can get them to, here's what your intentional conversations does. Here's the assessment that we're looking at and that we're seeing. Here's the work that you've done, and here's how it affects the larger picture. So right now, and from here on out, we're starting with, here is where you fit into the overall picture of what we do, in comparison to like what the hall directors do and what everyone else does. Here's where you fit into that picture.
That's awesome. I have been at a couple institutions now, including UNF, that use an intentional interaction model. And there's a couple things that I've found to be pretty successful with students. The first is really breaking down in training how to have those conversations. I think the first year that I ever piloted intentional interactions, we were like, our students are friendly. Like, we have the nicest RAs. They know how to talk to people. They are going to know how to do this. And what we learned was they absolutely did not, and felt really awkward and uncomfortable. So we broke it down in a similar way that you would do for behind closed doors, and worked through practice scenarios and gave them a formula. So I always teach, okay, step one is a lead-in. If you're gonna randomly knock on somebody's door, you need some sort of reason. Are you telling them about something? Are you going door to door and handing out goldfish and like using that as a conversation starter? Anything we ask you to go around and ask all your residents about, use that as the conversation starter. Then ask a lead-in question. So you came and you knocked on their door to be like, hey, just to let you know, we're having a floor meeting next week, but how are classes going? And what we found is they were like stopping at that question, and they'd be like, how are classes? And the residents be like, good. Be like, okay, cool, see ya. And so giving them some like guiding prompts and some questions about how do you translate how are classes into a deeper level conversation was really helpful. I think the other piece was like, there's something everywhere I've been that students have a hard time grappling with the word intentional. They feel like an intentional conversation means I scheduled it with that resident and we sat down and there was an agenda and I had a meeting. And so reframing that conversation for them to be like, maybe it is that. And I've seen some students that are like, I need to schedule my time out in that way. And I want all of my residents to sign up for a specific meeting time with me. but also being like, no, all of those conversations you have when you run into people in the laundry room, that's also intentional. The intentional piece is how you have the conversation, not when it was or where it was, and how to grapple with that. And so I think breaking down a lot of those like myths and barriers that they put up for themselves about what it means to have an intentional interaction was really important and beneficial.
Yeah, I would say what Jalen said. I'm sorry, Lovey. Go ahead. My apologies.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. I was going to say everything. I would echo everything Jalen said, and I think the other piece I would say is there's another component that I acknowledge on our campus, that we're a campus that we brought students to campus in the fall, and then we closed down like 2 weeks after students were on campus, right? And so we basically have, and then we brought students back in the spring semester. And so I share that with you is we have this piece where our students are still kind of like, well, what does an intentional interaction look like, and why do I have to do this? And COVID has caused us, there's this piece of like, maybe we don't want to come together because we could get sick. What does that look like? And so I mentioned all those examples basically to say is that we are now embracing where we're at in the COVID realities to switch things up a little bit. One is we know our students, when they come back to campus in the fall, they want to be together in community in person. And so when we think about these intentional conversations, we are turning this into more of a celebration of like, hey, you get to be together. What does this look like? The other piece that we're having these conversations about is we've hired people to be RAs who have only lived on campus for 2 weeks. So I share that with you is because we have to do more work, as Jalen shared, but additionally, we have the ability to help frame them. How do what do they look like? How should you engage? How does this piece play out? The last two things I would say is we've also gone to the piece of helping our staff understand what is in it for you. Like, what do you get out of this? What do your residents get out of this as well? Because we're seeing this generational shift even more of like, I'm not going to do it unless I can actually name how I'm benefiting from this experience, what have you. And so we're naming those with our student staff. And then finally, what I would say is we are just embracing Slack, Discord, Band, GroupMe if people are still using it. Like, we're embracing the sense of how are you learning about your residents from those experiences? How can you use poll features or whatever? How can you post those in there to learn about your students one-on-one or as a group collectively to gather some of this same information? Because we know there are things that we've learned about our residents through these different mediums that we don't want to, like, we weren't able to get before. So we don't necessarily want to run away completely from those platforms. And so that's when I think about intentional conversations as well, is maybe it's okay for us to embrace doing some of this virtual stuff and this other engagement pieces, and then figuring out how we build in the more purposeful one-on-one, face-to-face, in-person, in a COVID safe way, if you will.
I would add that we've added on check-ins as a part of intentional conversations. So your check-in is like every 2 weeks where you're like sending them a text or sending them, like something on their social media, right? So it's just like a, hey, how you doing? And we thought it would be like just this great other thing. So that way it didn't seem so heavy with intentional conversation. And that's the chore part that they're like, I mean, do I have to? Yeah, we want to check in. We're in a virtual world. Like, they may need that extra piece, that extra layer of check-in from you, and finding that's the part that they struggle with, which is so interesting to me, because you can schedule out your meetings or you can schedule out your onesies, but like sending a text is tough. But that's what you do with your friends anyway, right? You're DMing them and all this other stuff, but that seems to be like the difficult part, which I just think is pretty interesting. So, but I think, there's intentionality in that too for us, for them, even if they have to figure out how it works specifically in their schedule or with their residents.
Yeah, that was some incredible stuff. Thank you, everybody. And I appreciate Lovey and Jalen that you shared some examples and that role playing, or even as Jalen specifically mentioned, behind closed doors as a strategy, is a way that you've seen success in really just helping guide those facilitated conversations with your staff and putting them in those experiential learning opportunities so they can go and be successful, hopefully successful, right, in facilitating those conversations with their residents. And Brian, I definitely appreciated that you also mentioned embracing other mediums, right? Like, we're in a world where our residents have lived in a virtual communication land. They've been learning virtually. We've been engaging virtually for so long now that that's the new norm, and we have to continue to embrace and meet those students where they are. So moving forward, I am curious, and I'd love for you all to share how you're creating a socially just and equitable learning environment when you're onboarding and training and developing your staff. Is that something that we just have a responsibility to be committed towards? So how can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I think one of the things I think about creating a socially just and equitable learning environment is one of the things we've started doing is having conversations to begin with is who are we asking to do the labor? Like who are we asking to do the work? Is it the same people? Is it the same people that get tasked to do all this stuff because it's, you know, because of their own identities, because of their own passion areas? And we're asking those questions first because what I am tired of, I'm sorry, I'm going to my soapbox. I am tired of the same people being asked to do something that is a university mission, vision, values, and goals, and for the betterment, it's for the betterment of our society, right? Global citizenship, if you will. So that's the first thing that we're asking is who are we asking to do the labor? The second thing, what we're thinking through is we're looking at program expectations, and we're looking at presentation expectations and actually training formats and who gets face time. We're asking ourselves two questions. For our department, inclusion is one of our values. And so we're asking ourselves, how is that within every single session, like named out there so people can see that it's loud, lights, whatever, if you will, so people know that inclusion is important to us. And how are we introducing standalone sessions that are going to help our students be better at and not our students, just our entire staff, that are going to help them be better at interacting with their peers, their colleagues, what have you, all those pieces there. So I think those are the big questions that we're asking now. I think there's some things that we've learned through COVID, the switch to going virtual in the sense of related to universal design, you know, using captions and figuring out how we have accessible tools that are appropriate for everyone. The other thing that we've learned as well is we're going to embrace this hybrid approach to training and onboarding and development. So there are going to be some things that we're going to continue doing virtual, and there are things that we're going to ask staff to do before they come to campus. And so we've already asked ourselves in the sense of how are we doing some of this work when we know, and some of our staff members live in rural North Carolina that don't have high-speed internet access. But some of the presentations we have, some of the things that we're asking them to do, in order to do it effectively, it requires high-speed internet access. So we're asking questions as it relates to that in the sense of how are we providing those resources? Are we creating accommodations, letting people come back early? Are we creating sessions that people can do when they arrive at campus, but is not going to require them to work like 20 extra hours during the week, if you will, and figure out what that balance may look like. So I think those are some pieces from that perspective. I went back when I talked about onboarding, training, and development as well, in the sense of, do we have people who have the skills? And so I think that's important as well, is do people that, as it relates to creating a socially just and equitable and learning environment, do we have people who have the skills to actually do that? Are we putting people up in front of a room or creating learning experiences that are going to create more harm, or are they actually going to benefit our students in the learning experience? And we have to ask ourselves those questions. And we have to be okay with calling out facilitators if they're not okay to do that. I think too much we get too busy. We're like, hey, just go do this, assign this person, we need this to happen, and we don't name that. And so I think those are the things that we have to do as well. And then I think the final thing is we have to make sure when we think about from a just and equitable learning perspective, that we're mindful of the employee life cycle and the talent development life cycle as well. So we're actually being mindful of how we're bringing people into the organization, creating these learning experiences before they even get to us, throughout their time with us, and how we offboard them or prepare them for whatever their transition may be. So we're mindful of the entire individual, what they bring to the table, who they are, their values, beliefs, their fit with our organization. And that helps, I think, in my opinion, helps us be more socially just and equitable in our experiences and working with them.
I think we see lots of similar things. Two of the things that stood out for me when Brian was speaking, or at least one of them, was about that facilitation piece and making sure people have the skills to deliver the content that we're asking them to. So something we're working on right now at UNF is developing a lot of extensive facilitator training for our pro staff. Because I think we were previously operating under the assumption of like, oh yeah, people know how to do this. Well, people could just do it. If I say, Sharisa, go make a training on this thing, Sharisa will just know how to do that and create that learning environment. And rather than, I think to Brian's piece earlier about like recreating experiences that we've just seen before, how do we train people on how to intentionally really do that well and create top-notch learning experiences? The other piece that we started doing is looking at some of our assessment data. So we recently finished an assessment on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really doing a knowledge assessment of where is our staff at? And not just like assuming, oh, everyone on our team knows what this means or what this topic is or is well-versed enough to explain this, but actually asking people to do it and then evaluating, oh, okay, we have some gaps. How do we fill that with our pro staff so that we can make sure that they're prepared to train their student staff rather than just assuming, oh, this person knows about this topic or should know about this particular topic, so they're good to go and train student staff. Because I think just being transparent, I have seen in the past, I'm sure other folks have been in environments where you were in a harmful learning environment because your facilitator was not actually well-versed enough to facilitate some of those conversations.
I was going to add that assessment piece like Jalen added. And so one of the things that we do, we work with some outside companies in the Chicago area to curate an experience for our learning for our team. So we take the assessment that has happened from the year before, and when we look at it and see what we have missing, and then we ask the people who are coming into our spaces to help to educate, to curate based on, or to present based on what we've seen. So that way we're always continuing to grow instead of having this same type of presentation that we had last year, right? Because the students need, and our team, we need different things every year. So that assessment piece is really, really big for us.
I'm hearing a lot of themes throughout kind of what you all are sharing right now. And there's kind of this transition from onboarding to training to being candidate mindful to accessible with our now onboarded staff. And so there's some questions in the chat about, what decision making are you going through as you're setting those short-term and long-term goals? Summer module training versus in-person hybrid fall training, and how are you navigating those decisions and trying to make the processes as accessible as possible throughout having to still prioritize them learning to do their job?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and an important question. The way I typically go about doing this is I make a big spreadsheet of all of the topics that we cover in any sort of training. So if you're starting from scratch, list out everything. And then there's some columns that are essentially like, you need to know this by move-in day. You need to know this within the first 6 weeks, or it would be nice to have, but maybe we ain't gonna get there. And start thinking about that linearly. And then those topics that are those things where we're like, you need to know this by move-in day. I then differentiate those between, is this a concrete, tangible skill, or is this something that we need to process out loud and learn? I am a big fan of using a hybrid model for training. I don't believe that when we just solely put things online, we are risking our students either not retaining it or not paying attention. So really being intentional about, if it's only online and you're not covering it in person in any way, shape, or form, you are saying you are comfortable with them not knowing, you are comfortable with them forgetting it. And that might be the thing. It might be something that they can just need to have online to go back and reference, but that's not the thing you need them to pull off the top of their head. Those things that you only do in person, I like to think of those things as those things that need high touch, the things that really need some discussion and really some reflection and processing time that may be more difficult to grasp. The things that work well in a hybrid model are things where we can say, here's some pieces that are just the tactile pieces, and then let's process philosophy. Let's process theoretical frameworks. Let's process what this looks like in practice and some of the nuance and gray in person, so that you can save time going over, here's how to use this website, or here's how to use this tool. Here's what buttons to press to write the incident report, and talk through more of what are some of the challenges you might anticipate facing, so you can have more time for question and reflection. And so at a previous institution, when we first did that, we were able to double the amount of time we spent with student staff doing behind closed doors because we were able to rip out some of the like functional pieces of what buttons do you press to submit an incident report and how do you need to phrase it.
I think what's going to be big for us this year is, with COVID, we've seen that our team development has declined, right? So like, can we be a team together? Can we develop our staff as a team, kind of this team bonding thing? And so we've seen that has declined. Our focus this year is going to be anything that's campus partner related. We're going to have virtual, but any of those things that's going to help develop and build our team together, we're going to be in person as much as possible, because we've seen from our RAs, we've heard from our RAs that was a big deal for them. They just felt so disconnected from everything, and especially the team, especially when you come in and you've heard like, oh yeah, RAs, they're really like bonded together. And then this year is just so individualistic. We lost a lot of that. And so that's how we're going to focus this year, is like when it's really about bonding the team together, we're going to be in person for those experiences.
Yeah, Lovey, I think what you said spot on about the training piece, the team pieces. That's what our student staff are telling us, is we want to be together. And we've even had student staff share with us that I need you to teach me how to do this again and how to interact, because again, I'm used to Zoom University, right? Like that's my engagement, that's my interaction. Or, we have students and, I've lived at home. So I've spent my first year of college babysitting, remaining at home, doing whatever. And so how I engage is not necessarily I don't know how to engage on a college campus, but I want this job and I've been a leader before and we've hired them for various reasons, right? And so I think there's that responsibility that we figure out what that happy medium is. Jalen said something as well that I really appreciated. And so I just wanted to kind of share when Jalen shared the spreadsheet. One of the things that we did is in our this year, we completed a review of all of our job descriptions. And so in order to kick off training for us, for our we call it student staff training. So we have living learning mentors, RAs, all these different staff members, if you will. And because we've invited some of our academic partners to be part of the conversation as well. We actually did curricular mapping with our job descriptions to figure out, okay, what does your job description say and where does it belong? And so basically what Jalen was saying, we did that. But what we learned from this too, are there things in the job description that we really don't need the RAs to do and the staff members to do that we can cut? So that was a big piece that came from it. And what also came from this, what we learned is, are there things that we're asking our staff members to go through training because we need them to do, but we haven't named that in the job description, right? And so I think that's a piece when you think about this, going back to the onboarding, training, and development. One of the things I think about training piece, this brings these pieces together to figure out, one, did we advertise what they're supposed to do correctly? If not, we need to fix that. Are we training them to do it? And if we're not training them to do it, when are we going to develop them to help them gain those skills? And so I really love what Jalen said, because I think that's another byproduct that comes from this as well, is are we actually appropriately advertising what people will be doing? Are we compensating them for the labor that they're providing? Yes or no? Like those are things that come from this too. And so training, I think, again, sometimes it becomes a committee or it's someone's like part-time job or whatever, but it is so paramount because all these other things come from this as well.
Brian, we've never met, but we're vibing. We are on the same wavelength. And that was a lot of what we did in terms of including that pipeline in recruitment as well. We rewrote our job description. And so then we said, this is the job description. We are evaluating candidates based off of the job description. We are creating interview questions based off of the job description. And then we're creating our training around the job description. We are creating evaluations around the job description. So all of those things are in alignment. So we're besties now. I just want you to know that.
I love it. Good company.
That's really incredible. Thank you all for sharing. I was definitely like nodding along and like, yes, yes, yes to all of that. It's so vital. And I appreciate you sharing that. One of the things that I also thought about is recently we had a graduate staff member in our team ask where a physical building is on campus. And so that really had us thinking through the fact that some of our newer staff or even some of our residents who would have had this across campus experience have not had that cross campus experience this past year. And so you need to also consider building in another campus tour. They might be returning staff members with you, but what is their actual campus knowledge and ability to serve as a resource for their residents coming for the first time, when this is also maybe their first time also exploring campus, and just figuring out what that parallel is and how, as a staff member, they can go through some of those experiences alongside their residents, but also how do you equip them ahead of time to serve them as a resource for their residents when they arrive and traveling across campus.
That's a really good thought. So for this summer, our institution is bringing in students who would have been first year students last year, and creating a summer experience for them. So we have some staff members who will kind of be their RA and kind of lead them through activities and things like that to help them get this experience that they missed out on, which I think is just kind of an interesting thing. But we're working with our admissions and some other folks to help to curate what this could look like for them. But campus tours and things like that, I don't know if they've worked that in, but definitely a suggestion that I'm going to take because they don't know. So.
I think that leads us really well kind of to our next question. We were curious, what have you all found most effective when it comes to training over the last year or so, and what are you taking with you into the future? And then maybe what are you leaving behind? Are you making those decisions? Are you having those conversations? And how are you prioritizing what you throw out the window and what no longer needs to exist the way it has before?
So I'll answer that question, but I think one of the things that's important to as Jalen and I were vibing, I think one of the things that's important to acknowledge too is right, across the globe, everyone is looking at COVID very differently, right? There are different restrictions, there are different guidelines, there are different expectations. And I share that with you is because I think one of the things that as we have had training conversations, we're thinking about assessment pre-COVID, and then we're thinking about live assessment data information that students are providing us now. Everything is in conflict with each other, right? Some people want in person, some people don't want in person. Some people, our state, our policies in North Carolina regarding COVID and how many people can be in a room, it changes frequently. And what does that look like and such? And so I share that with you is because I think, as I answer this question about the most effective way to deliver it, I think it's just important to acknowledge that some of this stuff is ideal. We don't have it figured out perfectly here at NC State. We have an excellent team that is working to figure it out. And I share that with you is because last year, and when we had this unknown of what are we going to do and everything like that, we had plans A through Z as it related to training. A through Z didn't work out. We had to go to, I don't know, some other plans and stuff like that. So I just share that with you to say is that I want to put that out there and just acknowledge that because I think it's important. If I was sitting in the audience, I would want to hear that it didn't work out perfectly for the panelists because I would just want to hear that. So I want to share that with you all. And so I think for us, one of the things that we're doing as well, and going back to what is effective, what do we hope to keep, is I think what Jalen said in the sense of what works well is a hybrid experience. One of the things, we're talking about on our campus, what are the things that make sense that the students can do? I think they're on our campus, we're required to do, most all institutions, Title IX training, clear training and stuff like that. What are the required trainings that the university puts together that we need students to go through because it's the law? So we do that, right? We're planning it out. And then how in our training experience do we get our students to reframe that it's not just the law, but it's about supporting our students, right? And making that reframe there. And that's what we're looking to be more effective is how do we get some of the nuts and bolts pieces out of the way that we have to do? And what Jalen said, going back to this experiential piece, let's talk about the impact. Let's practice this stuff. Let's discuss this. And let's get away from just doing this stuff because we're required to and it's a checklist. So I think those are the pieces there. The other thing is, I think going back to some of the basic in the sense of how do we, Jalen talked about this, so I really should just pass to Jalen, but I want to give her this, but like, how are we training our facilitators for coaching, developing, and leading these small team conversations? Because we know on our end, we don't know how many people we can have in a room yet in the fall semester. So we know that there's a small number we can do. And so how are we supporting our facilitators to do small in area facilitation of conversations, dialogues, if you will, from that perspective? And then finally, what we've learned from this hybrid experience, where there are sessions or opportunities that we might be in person that we need to go ahead and record, because it will help us do a better job onboarding and training our mid-year hires with information that we've missed out on, and people have just had a binder or a bunch of links to go click through and everything like that. So I could keep going because I have lots of thoughts, but I'll put my period there to yield to Jalen and Lovey as well. Also, shout out to Jalen for repeating her ideas. Just want to put that up there publicly too.
Thanks, Brian. So, I think in our situation, I'm like thinking about like training in this way, like, yep, this is what we're going for, this is what we're going to do. And then our institution just yesterday announced that you have to be vaccinated to come back to campus. Right. And so a lot of institutions are moving toward this, but then that also changes the perspective of like, we're going to do this one thing, and now we have to figure out how to do it again. Because if we have team members who are like, I don't want to be vaccinated, because they don't have to, it's not mandated that they have to. It's just like, if you want to come back here, to live with us, then you have to. So like, what does that now look like? Right. So like, as in Chicago, there's a travel order and all of these things. So like, do we need you to come back earlier if you're planning on it? Do I need to know, can you come back if you've only gotten one and then your next one isn't until, you've gotten one shot and your next shot isn't until this date? So like that complicates things a little bit more for us. So like now we're thinking more broadly about what all of these things mean for our team. And this just happened yesterday. So like, here we are, and now we have to not necessarily start over, but like, what things are we missing, and how does all of this impact what we were going to do, and how do we change all of that? So that's where we're at right now.
And I think, Lovey, that also brings up a good point about maintaining morale, right? And so for how many staff members have been on staff last year, and the different roller coasters that they've ridden with us at the various levels in the department, and inviting them back or hiring them back or whatever, right? Like, this might be familiar for them. And so how, as professionals and supervisors, can we ensure that we're supporting them as people, as students, as staff members, as well as supporting a healthy work morale in our departments and achieving our goals? So I appreciate that you said that. It just kind of made me think of, this is familiar.
In terms of things that have been effective, there are 3 things that we did in the past year that have been like my absolute fave. One of the first things we did was create an off-cycle training model. So we knew that, like, I think the traditional recruitment model of like, oh, we are going to hire people and they're going to start on July 1 kind of has gone out the window, and especially went out the window with some of COVID. We are currently hiring at the University of North Florida. If you know anyone that wants to be Res Life coordinator, have them hit me up. But like, having a 4-week model that says, regardless of if we need to hire somebody on February 17th, this is what their training looks like. If we hire somebody on July 28th, this is what the training looks like, so that we're not trying to like scramble or create like a subpar training experience for somebody that joins after when our like traditional, this is when RLC training is. We kind of mirrored that for student staff. Not really mirrored, but we also ran into a similar problem of having to hire a number of RAs mid-year. So last year we hired 12 for the spring. So that was about a little over 10% of our staff were these mid-year hires. So we created a priority alternate position. So those student staff will go through our summer training and our summer training modules. They'll get paid and they're essentially on reserve. And if there's an opening, we're like, you've got called up to the majors, come pitch hit for Osprey Fountains. And they've already gone through training, and we just have to do refreshers instead of trying to throw them in mid-year, give them a whole 3-day crash course in being an RA. And there's the third thing that we did that I can't remember what it was, and I was excited about it. Oh, we cut a lot of stuff. We cut a lot of stuff from our pro staff training modules. I went through and said, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that either. Not doing that either. And just like giving ourselves permission to get rid of things. Like people have an easier time retaining things when there's less of it. I would rather tell you 20 things twice than 40 things once.
That's incredible. I like that. I was taking note on that. Tell you 20 things once or twice versus 40 things once. I appreciate that. Thank you. So looking at the time and knowing that there are some great things that were plugged into the chat, we kind of wanted to open it up. And so if you're interested in it as an audience member in unmuting yourself and asking your question to everybody, then that will be kind of how we wanted to guide the rest of the conversation today, is just having some active audience participation and asking your questions.
Yeah, I actually have a question. Jacob Maccabee from Florida Southwestern State College in Fort Myers, Florida. I am actually taking over the reins of doing our training, that sort of thing, and introducing the concept of curriculum this year, based upon our student engagement, creating a curriculum for our campus. And so we're actually being able to, they've already done the dig and that sort of thing for our learning outcomes, that's whatnot. And I'm going to be introducing something called Outside the Doors, which is kind of a different from behind closed doors, which is doing kind of facilitation practice in regards to giving them educational prompts to be able to kind of do that sort of thing. So we kind of assess where they're at and be able to kind of assess them and talk to them about where they're at and evaluate them. Does anyone have that set up at this point in time? And how do you go about doing those different kinds of scenarios? And what are some examples that you currently have? Sorry, long-winded, apologize.
I will say I don't currently have it set up, but totally down to brainstorm and think tank that with you.
We do open door, which is very similar, but I think what you're talking about may be a lot more in depth than what we do. So I would love to think tank that with you as well, to kind of let you know what we do and then get some more ideas for that.
Also, a shameless online community plug in there and really encourage you to send that out on the ACUHO-I online forum, and we will happily engage with you there.
Yes, to everything that's been said.
Yeah, great question, Jacob. Thank you so much for sharing kind of what you're working on, and in the future, just thank you in advance for including us in how you help build that out. Are there other questions for the panelists or any successes that you want to share? Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Aja Holmes and I'm at Cal State Sacramento, and love the panel. Thank you so much. I wrote down a lot of ideas, they're all borrowed. Thank you so much. I know you all talked about off-cycle training. I think Jalen talked about that. And one of the things that we did here for our RAs is that we have what we call RA-AIT, alternate in training. So we have about 5 of those that go through the training with us, and they're with the meals, and they're, and they do everything that we do besides the retreat and stuff like that, because we found that some people were going through the RA training, and once they found out what everything was entailed, they were like, deuces, we can't do this, and I couldn't do this. And that happened early on. And so we also use that as a part of our recruitment part to really talk about at the beginning, this is what is entailed in the job and things of that nature, and having RA panels as part of the recruitment part so they can kind of see that and ask some of those questions. But that was something that kind of helped us out. So that way, if this person gets picked up, then they've had the training and they can just go ahead and hit the ground running. And so that works. It worked for us, not for pro staff, because we can't bring somebody in and just train them without, So I do like the off-cycle training module for if we needed to apply that to a pro staff model. So I thank you so much for sharing that.
That's awesome. I'm from Sacramento, so big fan of Sac State. Ian had asked a question earlier, way earlier in the chat, but I would love to hear Brian and Lovey's thoughts. I have thoughts myself. Let's see if I can find it. And said, I'm wondering what, if any, advice/tips you can share on how you work with collaborating campus partners to hit the goals you need/want in sessions without micromanaging or dictating what the session is.
We try to work with them to let them know what our goals are for training. I think that's how we start, right? And so it's different every year a little bit. Sometimes it's the same, right? Like, because sometimes it's your work is just the same as your work. But I like to ask them, like, tell them this is what we're doing this year. These are our goals for the year. And then we work together to figure out like what that could look like in the session that they're doing. And so that's really for anybody that's a campus partner that I'm working with. And so that's what I do.
Yeah, I mean, we similar to what's been shared, we do the same thing. I think the other thing is just naming in the sense of who are the political players that are part of training that we have like it is what it is, right? And just acknowledging that, right? Like I think like I'm just acknowledging it and being okay with they're going to come with what they come, and as long as they're not causing any harm, and we can actually connect it to the residential experience, like maybe they're not the best presenter or whatever, we'll work with it. And so naming those people and then with that piece is taking some of the assessment data, some of the conversations to your leadership to say, all right, here's what they're doing. Here's the feedback we're receiving. We know politically, how can we navigate this football, if you will, and just naming that part there. I think the other thing is from the micromanaging piece, it goes back to what Jalen shared in regards to like, what truly needs to happen for opening. And are there other places where things can happen later in the year? And naming that and working with campus partners to figure out what that might look like. We instituted a first year live on requirement a few years ago. And so everyone knows our RAs have FaceTime with every single first year student, right? And so there are a lot of requests, there's a lot of asks, and what does that look like? And so we have to frame the conversation in regards to how is this going to benefit the residential experience for move-in, and maybe 30 days out, 60 days out, like how does that frame out, and where does that play out, and how can we get that work to happen? Additionally, for us, we used to have an RA class last spring was the last spring that we had that, and we sunset that program. And so one of the things that we're able to do is take some of the content that we want our RAs to learn from there and work with our campus partners to ask, how do we have this conversation? How do we bring you into this conversation to do what we need you to do? Based upon here are the goals that we've had, and what does that look like? And I think from that perspective, just having that conversation and knowing it's coming from research, it's coming from some theory and such, that has gotten people to understand like, oh, okay, you're not just saying this because you're Brian Botts and you're opinionated, which is true, but you're also saying this from the perspective of like, there's coming from some content beyond the scope of what you're thinking. And I think finally is like naming the expectations. I want to go back to what I talked about related to inclusion and such. It's one of the things that we're talking about is we just rewrote our mission, vision, and values. We're in the midst of a strategic plan for our department, all in the midst of a pandemic. So that's real fun. But with that being said, one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to think through, going back to inclusion, how is that part of everything that we do? And I think part of it is naming with our campus partners. If what you're trying to do can't help us achieve some of our division goals, some of our unit goals, then I don't know how this is going to work out. Finally, the last thing I would say is we have a wonderful brand new dean and vice chancellor for the Division of Academic and Student Affairs, where housing falls in alignment. And we are now on this mantra of trying to figure out how we're going to become a division of one. And so I think part of it is thinking through, having campus partners come in, setting expectations, but also understanding where you might need to amend your expectations because it's meeting these overarching larger goals, and recognizing that's okay, being okay with that too. So there's just a couple things that I'd throw out there.
I think those are all good things. I think things I would add is I like to think about collaborating with campus partners as like a tier system. And you go have different people at different tiers. There's the folks like Brian said, where you're like, okay, politically, we have to have these people at training and we cannot tell them no. How do we work around it? You might have folks where you can just be like, hey, can you partner with one of our coordinators on going over this content and seeing what that looks like? And maybe the two of them present together. Maybe it's just a, hey, can you look over our content and make sure it's in line with what your department or what your office wants. Because I think sometimes when we get to the point where we're like, okay, we're going to give them our learning objectives and the key talking points and the outlines for the slides. At that point, why did we bring that person in? If we had a whole vision of what we wanted to do, we could have just said, hey, DRC, does this look good? Is there anything else that we need to add? And framing as, we want to be respectful of your time. We want to make sure that you can focus on serving your students as well. So we will present the information with your blessing. Online modules is another good way of incorporating campus partners. I worked with some lovely, lovely humans at the counseling center that used to want to do a 5-hour training with my student staff. And I said, how about I build you a module? And they said, sure. And they cut that training down to 90 minutes. And our students were super, super grateful for that. And you invite campus partners in for an in-service after training has started. Can you do a resource fair where students can go around either virtually or in person to kind of just chat with campus partners? What do you actually need the partner for? And is it facilitating content? Is it kissing political rings, or is it you just want some FaceTime? Because if you just need FaceTime, there's lots of ways to do that in fashions that aren't giving every single campus partner a 30 to hour long time slot in your training schedule.
That is incredible. Thank you. I think we got one last question before we wrap it up. It came from Chris. Do you do ongoing training and development throughout the semester?
Sure do. We have in-services for our student staff, our graduate staff, as well as our professional staff. I think we've been looking at and toying with throughout the past couple years what those look like and what that framework is. Something we especially tackled with thinking about how do we create socially just learning environments, but we had these like in-service requirements, but our training topics, or we would have lunch and learns on diversity topics, and those were entirely optional. Like, do that if you want to, but this other in-service is a requirement. And so we infused more of that to be like, hey, going to these activities also counts for your ongoing development expectations as a student staff member. And so that's something we've been having lots of conversations about.
I'll just say we used, like I said, shared, we used to have an RA class, was a pre-service. And so that was where we did preemptively, I guess, did some of our training and development pieces. But I would just share, we're now at the place going back and evaluating the why. So we don't have a formalized program. We handle things within our team meetings, our staff meetings, and that's sort of where we're tackling that. But now we're having conversations. We're going to start having conversations in the sense of what is the purpose? What are we trying to achieve? And are we filling the gap where training messed up or and if we're filling the gap where training messed up, do we need to correct training? Or is there just ongoing learning development that needs to happen, right? And then when we say development, going back to our initial definitions of development, what are we actually trying to achieve? Are we trying to get this goal for someone who serves as a student staff member to develop a certain skill set that they didn't initially have when they first started? Like, what is that? And so it goes back to what is the purpose? Why are we doing this? And when does it make sense? And we're having those conversations. We're going to start having those conversations because we know our students are going to ask us that before we do it. And also we need to ask those questions before we just say, hey, that's a good idea. Let's just do it. But why?
Perfect. Thank you so much. Looking at the time, I do want to make sure that we honor the commitment to get you all out of here at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so I just want to say a big thank you to our panelists. Thank you for taking your time to share your talents and your expertise with the audience today. And of course, special thanks to Sharisa at UNF for co-facilitating this with us, or with me. And then for Spencer over at ACUHO-I for providing the tech support and facilitating a lot of the before the scenes aspects of this. And so if you have questions, continue to drop them in the chat if you would like, and we'll stay on and record them. We also definitely wanted to remind you to join the online community and continue the conversation there. There's a lot of great conversation that I think we had today that I feel really re-energized about, and the questions that came in. So we hope that you'll continue to engage with this group, and we'll continue to share and navigate the trial and errors of jumping into the fall 2021 semester. So thank you all. And Spencer, I don't know if you need anything, but you're welcome to jump in.
Thank you so much to our panelists and to our moderators today. Outstanding session. So look for this recording to be on our academic initiatives webpage shortly. Thanks for all your time and talent today. And certainly attendees, if you'd send some kudos to our facilitators and panelists today, that'd be great in the chat. Have a great one, everyone.